Imagine lying in a hospital bed, minutes from emergency surgery, and the one call you make to your own parents. They say they're too busy planning your sister's party to pick up your child. I'm Anna, and this is the story of how I learned the hardest way that blood doesn't always mean family. What would you do if the people you trusted most turned their backs when you needed them the most? Stick around, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Family is supposed to be a safety net, not a thread that snaps when you need it most. I used to believe that somehow if I worked hard enough or smiled wide enough, the people I loved would notice me. But as the years went by, that belief frayed, thread by thread, until it was nothing more than a whisper of hope. I still remember sitting in the audience at Chloe's first piano recital. I was 9. Chloe was 5, dressed in a frilly pink dress, her hair in bouncing curls. I clapped until my palms burned, while Mom and Dad sat in the front row, beaming like the sun had risen just for her. No one asked if I wanted to take lessons too. No one even turned around to see me sitting there, swinging my feet under the folding chair. By the time I reached college graduation, I should have known better than to expect anything different. It was a warm afternoon in Greenville, South Carolina. The campus buzzed with laughter and camera flashes. I wore my navy blue gown with the honors cord, a silly-looking cap perched on my head. As I scanned the crowd, I spotted my parents standing stiffly at the back, Dad tapping his foot impatiently, Mom glancing at her watch. The ceremony felt endless. Name after name was called, applause rising and falling like waves. When they finally called mine, Anna Sullivan, summa cum laude, I walked across the stage with my heart pounding. I searched the audience, hoping just for a second to catch their eyes. But Dad was already checking his phone, and Mom was whispering something to Chloe, who looked utterly bored. After the last speech, as graduates hugged and took pictures, my parents found me just long enough to snap a quick photo. Chloe stood next to me, holding a bouquet so large it nearly swallowed her arms, a gift from Mom and Dad for being such a good sport about attending my ceremony. I got a limp cluster of daisies from a college roommate who felt sorry for me. "We can't stay," Mom said, adjusting Chloe's headband. "Her piano competition starts in an hour." "Congratulations, though," Dad added, already steering Chloe toward the parking lot. I stood there alone, the sun burning down on my cap, the diploma folder slippery in my sweaty hands. Around me, other families hugged and laughed and took photos against the flowering trees. I pulled out my phone, ordered some Chinese takeout, and ate it alone on my couch that night while Chloe showed off her third-place medal at the dinner table. I didn't cry. Not then. I had learned a long time ago that tears changed nothing in my family. Instead, I opened my laptop, polished my resume, and started applying for marketing jobs. I told myself that maybe, if I built a good life, a real life, I wouldn't need their approval. Maybe my worth didn't have to be tied to whether or not they clapped for me. Within a month, I landed a position at a mid-sized marketing firm in downtown Greenville. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I rented a tiny apartment on the second floor of an old brick building that smelled faintly of coffee and rain. I bought mismatched furniture from thrift stores and hung up cheap curtains that fluttered in the spring breeze. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. Every morning I woke up before the sun, made coffee in a chipped blue mug, and walked to the office with my head held high. No one there knew that I was the invisible daughter. No one cared that I didn't come from some proud, tight-knit family. They just cared that I worked hard, that my ideas were fresh, that I met my deadlines. One night, after a long day of work and a simple dinner of grilled cheese and tomato soup, I sat at my tiny kitchen table, looking at the city lights blinking through the window. I made a promise to myself. I would build a life where I wasn't just tolerated. I would build a life where I mattered. As I was washing my single plate in the sink, my phone buzzed on the counter. I dried my hands on a dish towel and picked it up. A text from Emma, a friend from college. "Hey, Luke Carter just asked about you." Should I give him your number? I stared at the screen for a long moment, the water dripping from my fingers onto the floor. Luke Carter. I hadn't thought about him in years. Back in college, he had been the kind of guy who made everyone feel seen, something I had always quietly admired but never expected for myself. Maybe the thread I needed wasn't behind me. Maybe it was somewhere ahead, waiting to be woven into something stronger. I smiled, wiped the last drip off my hand, and typed back, "Sure, why not?" Sometimes you lay every brick yourself, believing love will fill the cracks. I spent years stacking hopes like stones, imagining that if I just built carefully enough, one day I'd have a home filled with warmth instead of silence. In high school, I used to blow out the candles on my birthday cake, the same store-bought chocolate sheet cake every year, and whisper to myself, "One day, I'll have a family where birthdays don't feel lonely." Back then, it felt like a wish you toss into a fountain and walk away from, never expecting anything to come of it. But life, in its quiet, stubborn way, has a funny way of surprising you. It was a crisp afternoon in October 2016 when I bumped into Luke Carter again. I was standing in line at a local coffee shop, fumbling with my phone, when I heard someone say my name. I turned around, and there he was, a little taller, a little scruffier, but with the same easy smile that could melt even the chilliest day. "Anna Sullivan," he said, holding a pumpkin spice latte in one hand. "Didn't think I'd see you back here." We laughed about old college memories, awkward group projects, and how we both thought we'd end up somewhere bigger, somewhere busier than Greenville. One cup of coffee turned into two, then into walking downtown as the autumn leaves crunched under our boots. Luke had a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room, even on the busiest street corner. He listened with his whole face, nodding, smiling, leaning in like every word you said mattered. For someone like me who had grown up feeling invisible, that kind of attention was dizzying. By Christmas, we were inseparable. Luke wasn't perfect. He could be impulsive, and he sometimes made promises bigger than he could keep. But he was warm. He was kind. He made room for me, and for the first time, I let myself believe I belonged. The following fall, at the Harvest Festival in a tiny town just outside Greenville, Luke proposed. We were wandering through rows of hay bales and handmade candles, sipping hot apple cider. The sun was setting behind a row of red barns, and a local band played an off-key but charming version of "You Are My Sunshine." Luke pulled me aside, right near a towering stack of pumpkins, and dropped to one knee without a word. The ring was simple, a small sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds, but it sparkled like a piece of sky. "Anna," he said, his voice unsteady, "let's build something together. Let's build the life we always dreamed about." I didn't even let him finish. I blurted out, "Yes," so loudly that a group of nearby kids on a hayride cheered. We married the following spring in a small outdoor ceremony at a local orchard. Margaret, Luke's mother, insisted on helping with the decorations. She hand-sewed my bouquet ribbon from scraps of lace she had saved from her own wedding dress. Daniel, Luke's father, spent 2 weekends crafting wooden tables by hand because store-bought ones just don't have enough soul. The decor was simple: wildflowers in mason jars, candles floating in big glass bowls, baskets of apples everywhere. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass and homemade apple pie. Guests sipped spiced cider and wiped their hands on linen napkins Margaret had embroidered herself. It wasn't grand, but it was real. And for a few fleeting hours, I let myself believe this was what it felt like to be fully loved. Of course, my parents came. Obligation more than excitement. Deborah and Richard Sullivan sat stiffly at the back, barely touching the plates of food Margaret had so lovingly prepared. Chloe wasn't even there. She had an audition for some state music competition she couldn't miss. At the reception, I moved through the crowd, laughing, hugging old friends, soaking up the joy like it might somehow stitch itself into my skin. I was carrying a plate of apple crumble to Luke when I passed by my mother, who didn't notice me at all. She was whispering sharply to my father. "Hopefully Chloe gets a real wedding next year," she said, her voice dripping with quiet disdain. I stopped, the plate trembling slightly in my hands. A piece of the world I had been building, brick by careful brick, cracked just a little. I didn't say anything. I just smiled tightly at the next person who greeted me, balanced the plate a little higher in my arms, and kept walking. Later that night, after the dancing and the last of the cider had been poured, Luke and I climbed into his old pickup truck, decorated with tin cans and white streamers. We were driving to a little cabin in the woods, our makeshift honeymoon spot. Luke reached over, lacing his fingers through mine, his smile so wide it lit up the whole truck cab. "You okay?" he asked, squeezing my hand gently. I looked out at the dark ribbon of road stretching ahead of us and nodded. "I'm just tired," I said softly. And maybe I was. Tired of building castles out of dust. Tired of hoping that one day my family would look at me and see something worth celebrating. But as Luke's thumb rubbed small circles on the back of my hand, I also felt something new, something sturdier. Maybe this time I wasn't building alone. True love is small, heavy, and fits perfectly into the crook of your arm. I didn't understand that kind of love until the day Eli was placed on my chest, his tiny fists trembling against my skin, his newborn cries slicing through the sterile air of the hospital room. July 19th, 2019, the hottest day of the year in Chicago, and there I was, cradling a whole new world in my arms. Sunlight poured through the hospital windows, blinding and beautiful, warming the white sheets tangled around my knees. Margaret and Daniel had driven hours just to be there, arriving with balloons that bobbed awkwardly against the ceiling and a small hand-knit blue blanket Margaret had made herself. Luke smiled for the pictures, beaming as he cradled Eli for the first time, but I noticed how he kept glancing at his phone, at the stack of work emails that couldn't seem to wait. Meanwhile, my parents, well, they sent a text. "Congrats, hope he's healthy." That was it. No phone call, no flowers, no visit. Just 12 words that buzzed across my screen as I stared down at the most perfect little soul I had ever seen. I could have let that ruin the moment, but instead I wrapped Eli tighter against my chest and whispered into his soft, downy hair, "I promise you'll always feel seen." In the months that followed, life shrank down to the tiny universe inside our sun-filled apartment. Late-night feedings under the glow of the streetlights outside, lullabies hummed half awake, the smell of warm formula and baby shampoo lingering on my clothes. I learned how to juggle a squirming infant and a laptop balanced precariously on my knees, answering emails with one hand while bouncing Eli with the other. Luke traveled more and more. First short trips to Minneapolis or Nashville, then longer stretches to Seattle or Denver. He promised they were quick projects, necessary for his promotion. I tried to believe him, tried to understand, but every time he left, the apartment felt emptier, quieter, and every time he returned, it felt a little harder to bridge the space that had grown between us. Margaret and Daniel visited once a month without fail. They brought casseroles in foil pans, warm banana bread wrapped in dish towels, and tiny knitted socks that never quite stayed on Eli's chubby feet. Margaret would sit by the window, rocking Eli and humming old hymns, while Daniel told silly stories about Luke's childhood mishaps, like the time he tried to build a go-kart out of cardboard boxes and duct tape. Those afternoons were a balm I didn't know I needed. They didn't fill the hole left by my parents' indifference, but they patched the raw edges enough to keep me standing. At night, after Eli finally drifted off in his crib, I would sink into the old armchair by the window, a cup of lukewarm coffee in my hands, and stare out at the city blinking its endless, restless rhythm. Sometimes I'd hum to myself, a quiet promise threading through the song. You are not invisible. You are not alone. One evening, when Eli was about 6 months old, I found a small, battered notebook tucked under a pile of mail. It was my old journal from college. I flipped through the pages, smiling at the wide-eyed dreams scribbled in messy handwriting. Dreams about finding love, about building a home where birthdays were celebrated with too much cake and laughter that echoed down the halls. I realized then that I had built that home. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not with the partner I had imagined, but every giggle from Eli, every sticky kiss on my cheek, every exhausted, delirious midnight diaper change, they were bricks laid carefully, lovingly by my own hands. Still, the cracks were there, thin and spreading. One night in early 2021, long after Eli had fallen asleep, I sat curled up in bed, scrolling through social media while waiting for Luke's nightly check-in call. He had been in Seattle for 3 weeks now, a stretch longer than usual. I tried not to let the silence between us feel like a verdict, but the longer I stared at the empty space beside me, the harder it became. As I mindlessly scrolled, a photo caught my eye. A friend of a friend had tagged Luke at a trendy restaurant in downtown Seattle. There he was, laughing, his arm slung casually over the back of a booth, his body tilted just a little too closely toward a woman with dark hair and a dazzling smile. The caption read, "Best team dinner ever." Something sharp twisted inside me, but I didn't make a sound. I didn't throw the phone or burst into tears. I just stared at the photo, feeling the cold, familiar weight of being left behind settle onto my chest like an old, unwelcome blanket. But this time, it wasn't just me. I glanced over at Eli, who had shifted in his sleep, one tiny hand curled into a fist against his cheek. My heart swelled with something fiercer than pain, fiercer than loneliness. It was a love that had nothing to do with who stayed or who left, a love that didn't crack or fade. I turned off the phone, placed it face down on the nightstand, and pulled the covers up to my chin. The world might shift around me. People might leave or disappoint, but one thing was unshakable, unbreakable. I had Eli, and he had me. Whatever came next, we would face it together. It's strange how the ones you call first are sometimes the ones who let you fall the hardest. You grow up thinking family is a given, a net stretched wide beneath you. But sometimes you realize it was never there at all. The morning it happened, the air still smelled like winter, sharp and metallic, even though the calendar said spring had arrived. I was standing in the middle of a conference room at work, presenting a marketing proposal to a client whose face blurred into a haze of suits and polite nods. I don't remember what I was saying. I just remember the sudden, white-hot pain knifing through my right side, so sharp it took my breath away. Next thing I knew, I was on the floor, someone shouting for help, the buzz of fluorescent lights above me spinning faster than I could catch. At the hospital, the world shrank to a series of clipped voices and sterile smells. Doctors moved quickly, tossing around words like acute appendicitis and emergency surgery, while I lay there, dazed, tethered to a blinking monitor. All I could think about was Eli. He was at preschool just a few blocks from our apartment. It was almost 3 o'clock. School would be letting out soon. I fumbled for my phone with shaking fingers, my mind moving sluggishly through the fog of pain and fear. I called the only people who should have been automatic. It took 4 rings before my mother answered, her voice crisp and rushed. "Anna." "What's going on?" "Mom," I gasped, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I'm at the hospital. I need emergency surgery. Can you please pick up Eli from school? I can't—" There was a pause. Too long. Too cold. "We're getting ready for Chloe's engagement party tonight," she said finally, like she was reminding me of something obvious. "There are nearly 60 guests coming. We're busy, Anna." I swallowed hard. "Mom, I'm lying in a hospital bed. Eli needs someone. He's your grandson." She sighed, a sharp, irritated sound. "Why do you always make everything complicated? Eli's always running around, asking a million questions. It's not a good time." The words sliced through me, sharp and clean. Watching him, she had said, as if Eli were a burden, as if the boy who was my whole world was nothing more than an inconvenience to be brushed aside. Before I could answer, she hung up. I stared at the phone in my hand, my body numb from something deeper than physical pain. A nurse touched my arm gently, telling me they needed to prep me for surgery. I nodded, unable to form words. I thought about Eli, his small backpack decorated with dinosaurs, waiting by the school doors, glancing up eagerly for a face he knew. I thought about the teddy bear he had given me last weekend, a faded thing with one button eye, which now sat on the gurney beside me. I clutched it to my chest like a life raft. Somehow, through the haze, I remembered Sophie, Luke's younger sister, the one who had never once made me feel like an afterthought. With trembling hands, I called her. She picked up on the first ring. "I'm at the hospital," I croaked. "I need surgery. Eli's at school. I'm going," Sophie said without hesitation. "Text me the school address. I'll pick him up right now." Relief crashed over me so hard it brought fresh tears to my eyes. By the time the surgical team wheeled me toward the operating room, I felt a flicker of peace. Eli would be safe. He wouldn't be alone. Just as the elevator doors slid closed, my phone buzzed again. One new text from my parents. "Hope you manage. By the way, we need to talk about expenses soon." The words blurred through the tears welling in my eyes. Not "hope you're okay," not "we're praying for you," just business. They hadn't even asked if I would survive the night. As the anesthesia crept into my veins, heavy and cold, I held the teddy bear tighter against my chest. The last thing I thought before the darkness took me was that sometimes the thread you thought was family snaps clean through. And maybe, just maybe, that was its mercy. When I woke up, everything felt heavy and muted, like the world was wrapped in cotton. Machines beeped steadily somewhere nearby. I shifted, wincing at the dull ache in my side. A nurse appeared, smiling softly, telling me the surgery had gone well. I murmured thanks and closed my eyes, trying to rest. Later, when the haze lifted a little, I reached for my phone on the bedside table. There it was, a voicemail from my mother. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen, then pressed play. Her voice was cool, detached, like she was reading from a script she had no real feeling for. "Anna, we hope you're recovering well. We also wanted to remind you about the support we've given you over the years. Between college expenses, your wedding, and various other things, it totals quite a significant amount. Since you're working now and seem stable, we think it's fair for you to contribute back. We'll send you the itemized list. Please arrange for repayment soon. Thank you." Click. I sat there staring at the ceiling tiles, feeling the last fragile threads between us dissolve into nothing. They hadn't called because they cared. They called because they saw me as a debt to collect. Outside the window, the Chicago skyline blinked under a gray afternoon sky. Cars rushed past, people going about their ordinary lives, oblivious to the quiet heartbreak unfolding in a hospital room 4 stories up. I turned the phone over in my hand, face down. The beeping of the machines, the shuffle of nurses' shoes against linoleum, the faint smell of antiseptic, all of it blurred into one long, empty hum. But even in that emptiness, a single stubborn truth rooted itself deep inside me. I wasn't alone. Not really. Eli was out there, laughing probably, asking Sophie 1,000 questions about dinosaurs and trucks and the mysteries of the universe. He was my thread now, stronger, brighter, unbreakable. And for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't need the people who had always made me feel small. I had built something better, something worth holding on to. Blood ties mean nothing when they choke instead of nourish. It took me nearly 30 years to understand that truth, and even longer to accept it. Recovery after surgery was slow but steady. I spent the first week moving carefully around the apartment, wincing whenever I laughed or sneezed. Eli was a patient little nurse, offering me his stuffed dinosaur to hug whenever I grimaced. Margaret and Daniel took turns stopping by, always bringing something warm. Casseroles, fresh fruit, a smile that asked nothing in return. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed almost daily with missed calls and voicemails from my parents, messages layered with guilt, half-hearted concern, and thinly veiled demands. "We only want what's fair, Anna. You owe us for everything we've sacrificed. Family doesn't turn its back unless they're ungrateful." I would read the notifications without opening them, feeling the familiar weight settle in my chest. For years, I had let their voices shape me, trap me, define what I thought love was supposed to look like. But not anymore. One gray Saturday morning, I brewed a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, Eli coloring quietly on the floor nearby. I opened my laptop, my hands steady for the first time in days, and typed a short, final email. "Dear Mom and Dad, I will not be sending money. I will not be maintaining contact. Please do not reach out again. I wish you well." I didn't explain myself. I didn't defend or accuse. I simply stated a boundary and pressed send. It was the softest click in the world, but it sounded like thunder in my ears. Next, I went through my phone, blocked their numbers, removed their emails, updated my emergency contacts, replacing their names with Margaret and Daniels. If anything ever happened to me, it would be them, not Deborah and Richard Sullivan, who would step in for Eli. People who had shown up, people who loved not by duty, but by choice. Later that afternoon, Margaret stopped by with a bunch of daisies and a pot of homemade chicken noodle soup that smelled like a hug. She didn't press me to talk. She just put the flowers in a jar, ladled soup into bowls, and sat with me by the window while Eli napped. "You know," Margaret said gently, stirring her spoon in slow circles, "family are the people who show up, not the ones who demand proof." I nodded, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes, but this time I didn't let them fall. Instead, I smiled. A small, real smile that I didn't have to force. Sophie arrived later with an armful of children's books. She plopped them onto the couch with a triumphant grin. "Every hero needs a good library," she declared, ruffling Eli's hair when he ran to her with sleepy excitement. That night, after dinner and too many rounds of Goodnight Moon and Where the Wild Things Are, I found myself digging through an old box shoved in the back of my closet. It was filled with pieces of a life I was ready to leave behind. Yearbooks, birthday cards that always felt obligatory, a few brittle photographs. At the bottom, I found one picture. Me at age 10, sandwiched stiffly between Mom and Dad, Chloe grinning brightly in front of us with a giant spelling bee trophy. I remembered that day, how they had barely acknowledged my own report card tucked into my backpack, filled with A's they hadn't noticed. For a long moment, I just stared at the photo, tracing the faded edges with my thumb. Then, quietly, without ceremony, I walked into the kitchen, lit a match, and held the flame to the corner of the photograph. The paper curled and blackened, the image crumbling into ash. It wasn't anger that filled me. It wasn't bitterness. It was something softer, acceptance. I wasn't burning my past out of hatred. I was making space for something better. Eli was already asleep when I returned to the living room. He had curled himself into a ball on the couch, one of Sophie's new storybooks clutched loosely in his hand. Next to him was a crayon drawing, still wet in places where his little fingers had pressed too hard. I picked it up and smiled. It was a tree, tall and wide, its branches sprawling out with names carefully written above each one. Mommy, Eli, Grandma Margaret, Grandpa Daniel, Aunt Sophie. No Deborah, no Richard, no Chloe. Just the family we had chosen. The family who had chosen us. I tucked the blanket around Eli, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. Outside, the city hummed in the distance, but inside, our little apartment felt like an island of peace. As I turned off the lights and slipped into bed, I felt something shift deep inside me, a final thread snapping, but not with the sharp pain I had once feared. It snapped cleanly, quietly, leaving behind only lightness. I had cut the roots that had never truly nourished me, and in doing so, I had made room for new roots to grow. Real ones, strong ones, the kind you can build a life on. Sometimes family isn't who you're born to. It's who you build with love and laughter. I used to think roots had to come from where you started. that you couldn't grow strong unless you stayed tethered to the people who raised you. But standing there that afternoon, watching Eli's face light up under a canopy of fairy lights, I knew better. It was the first Saturday of October, the air crisp but not cold, the leaves starting to blush red and gold around the edges. Margaret and Daniel's backyard looked like something out of a storybook. Strings of tiny lights crisscrossed the garden, and tables covered with checkered cloths groaned under the weight of homemade treats. Margaret had baked Eli's favorite cake, a chocolate sun with a big lopsided smile. Daniel had set up lawn games, a beanbag toss, ring toss, even a little obstacle course made out of pool noodles and overturned buckets. Sophie fluttered around with her camera, snapping candid photos of every giggle, every frosting-smeared smile. Neighbors wandered in with gifts wrapped in bright paper. Friends from preschool showed up clutching plastic dinosaurs and action figures. Eli darted from one group to another, his laughter cutting through the crisp afternoon air like music. I stood off to the side, a paper cup of cider warming my hands, just watching. Watching my boy run barefoot through the grass, his cheeks flushed with happiness. Watching Margaret tie a balloon to his wrist, Daniel pretending to be knocked over by a flying beanbag, Sophie crouched in the grass, aiming her camera just right. I watched, and I breathed it all in. This messy, loud, joyful afternoon was the answer to every lonely birthday I had ever sat through, every recital where no one clapped, every hospital bed where no one came. Toward the end of the party, when the cake was nothing but crumbs and the sun was dipping low behind the fence, Eli ran up to me, breathless and beaming. "Mommy, look," he said, holding out a piece of thick construction paper. It was a tree, drawn in wild, looping crayon strokes, its trunk sturdy and its branches wide. Each branch had a name scribbled in careful, wobbly letters. Mommy, Eli, Grandma Margaret, Grandpa Daniel, Aunt Sophie. There were no missing spaces, no awkward blank spots for people who didn't deserve to be there. Just us, just love. I knelt down, brushing a leaf from his hair, and took the picture carefully from his hands like it was something sacred. "Mommy," Eli asked, his eyes serious, "is this what real family feels like?" I pulled him close, feeling his small arms wrapped tightly around my neck. "It's exactly what real family feels like," I whispered into his hair. "Exactly." We stayed like that for a while, the sounds of the party fading into a soft hum around us. The world didn't feel so sharp anymore. It didn't ache in the places it used to. Instead, it felt full of names whispered across branches, of laughter sown into autumn air, of promises kept without needing to be spoken aloud. Later, as twilight settled over the yard, we packed up half-eaten cupcakes and crumpled streamers. Sophie snapped one last picture. Eli perched on Daniel's shoulders, Margaret laughing beside them, me standing with one hand on Sophie's back. A messy, imperfect snapshot of everything that truly mattered. As we loaded up the last of the folding chairs, I tucked Eli's crayon drawing carefully into my bag. No matter where life led us, no matter what storms rolled in, we'd planted something here. Something stronger than the roots I was born with. Something real. A family not made by blood, but by every choice to stay. Every hand held, every heart open. And for the first time in a long, long while, I knew we were going to be just fine. We already were. There, under the soft glow of fairy lights, I finally understood. Family isn't given. It's built with every small choice to love, to show up, to stay. Sometimes the people who lift you higher aren't those who share your blood, but those who share your heart. In this life, it's not where you come from that defines you, but the love you choose to plant and nurture. If this story touched something inside you, I'd be honored to hear your thoughts. After all, sharing our stories is how we remind each other we're never truly alone.